Well, Patty, I really enjoyed our interview today with Caleb Avery over at Tild with his PayFac as a service. I'll be honest, I learned a lot. I didn't even know really what we were going to be talking about until we started the interview. So,
Well, I'm like you. I looked at the website and I was like, PayFac as a service?
right. And it's
But
funny, I actually dialogued with his team before and I crafted the questions and I was like, okay, I think I got it. And then within about a minute of his interview, I was like, nope, I didn't get it. I still didn't get it. So we went off script.
And
it was good.
We went off script, but I thought he laid it out really well.
Yeah, he did a fantastic job.
I learned a lot from this interview, and I think our listeners will too.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from your questions from the field, James. You want to
Thanks,
tell everybody about that?
Yeah, we just talked about selling card not present merchants, specifically with a focus on surcharging, compliant surcharging, and or cash discounting with ACH as an option. But the big takeaway is just you need to do it. You got to start in 2022. It's not that hard anymore. The technology's there. It's not that difficult. And then Patty, tell us about the Insiders Report.
We're just reporting on some litigation in the field. There's a bunch of lawyers down south that have been taking on payment processing companies over their contracts and their charges, and it's just really worth keeping a finger on the pulse of that.
Absolutely. Well, good stuff. So this episode is brought to you by Lavu. Lavu is a processor agnostic point of sale system for restaurants with a focus on cash discounting and pay at the table and all of that. At the end of the month, we actually already recorded it. We have a great interview for you at the end of the month about specifically how to sell cash discounting to restaurants. But let me just say, if you want to get more information about Lavu, you can go to lavu.com, Lavu.com, or you can actually text. They set up this really cool service where you can just text the word Lavu, Lavu. Just text the word Lavu to a short code. It is 63975. So text Lavu, Lavu, to 63975. Go ahead and text that or visit lavu.com. This is a big opportunity and one you're going to want to take advantage of. With all that said, let's jump into our interview now with Caleb Avery.
Okay.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey everybody, Patty and I are here today with Caleb Avery. He is the CEO at Tild. How are you doing today, Caleb?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, James?
I am doing great. So we are here to talk about the exciting world of PayFacs and ISV relationships and all kinds of cool stuff. Before we dive into that, though, Caleb, tell us your story. You and I don't believe have ever spoken, so I don't even know your story. So how did you get into this crazy industry? How did you end up at Tild?
Yeah, so between my sophomore and junior year of college, I started going door to door selling payment processing services to small business owners. So I think probably like a lot of your listeners, I started out as an agent going out selling payments door to door to small business owners. And that was the first couple of years of my career in the merchant services space. But over time, I started getting brought in on consulting opportunities for larger software companies. So think, dental software platform processing a couple $100 million a year in payments volume. And for a lot of these guys, they were really trying to think through the transition of how to go from Stripe or Braintree to really start monetizing the payments flowing through their platform. And so at the time, we were hooking them into gateways like an NMI or an authorize.net, helping them negotiate their ISO referral agreements. But the big issue that a lot of these guys were facing was the onboarding solutions that they had from, these processors. And so we were really trying to help these guys think through how do they take advantage of the benefits of the payment facilitator model. And that consulting work was really what first got me introduced into the PayFac model.
So talk to us, and you've already alluded to this a second about the onboarding. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on, what that challenge looks like. But in general for ISVs, what do they want today from a payment provider, these independent software vendors, and specifically, kind of how the PayFac services fit some of that need?
Sure. So, for a lot of these ISVs, the first thing that they're looking to do is get payments integrated into their product. They offer scheduling solutions and they're trying to expand their core product to integrate payments into their solution. I think that's where Stripe oftentimes really starts to come into play, where they're looking for great developer tools and they want to get up and running quickly to integrate payments into their solution. So that's where I think a lot of ISVs start their payments journey, is just looking to get payments quickly integrated into their product. But a lot of ISVs reach this point in their journey where they have enough payments flowing through their platform where they really want to start monetizing the payments that are flowing through their systems. And that was where I was being brought in as a consultant. I think that's where the opportunity is for a lot of agents and ISOs that are out there, where, going out and talking to startups is not really going to make you any money and isn't really the best place, in my opinion, to start. But as these ISVs are really scaling up and thinking through, how do we generate revenue off of the payments flowing through their platform, they need a partner that can offer them, a lower price solution than they have with something like Stripe. But they also need technology. They need boarding tools, they need payment gateways, they need chargeback management solutions. And so being able to bring all of those pieces of the puzzle to the table is really key for solving the problems that these ISVs are looking to solve for.
So tell me, if you don't mind, Caleb, I was looking at the website just before we got on, and I was really struck. I have to admit, I had never heard the concept of PayFac as a service, although I've heard of everything else as a service, so it didn't totally surprise me. But, for others like myself out there, can you kind of explain what is it that Till does that's different from what a traditional processor or ISO might do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you think about the payment facilitator model, Stripe, Square, Braintree, PayPal have really made the model famous. And one of the nice things is that there's really different rules established by the card brands governing the onboarding process for, in this case, sub-merchants under the PayFac model. And so it allows for this instant digital boarding experience for sub-merchants. And that's really, I think one of the reasons why, the Stripes and the Squares of the world have really come onto the scene and really, made a pretty big name for themselves. The problem, though, historically has been the process to become a PayFac. And so, historically, that was a 2-year multi-million-dollar process for a payment facilitator to go through the full registration process to build out all of those capabilities. And when you look at what we're doing with PayFac as a service, we're taking that 2-year multi-million-dollar process and bringing that down where your average software company can leverage the benefits of the PayFac model in about 2 or 3 weeks with no upfront costs, without having to hire a team, without having to take on the liabilities associated with being a PayFac. And so the as a service piece is really where we're handling all of the underwriting, the fraud monitoring, the chargeback management, all of the compliance aspects on behalf of our customers, and allowing them to really focus on their core product and not payments.
I'm sorry to cut you off there, Pat. I know you have a follow-up there, but I just want to dig into this a little bit more, Caleb, because again, I feel like there's a lot of people. Yeah, most people in our audience are like, PayFac, I've heard that before, but I think most in our audience would probably think of a PayFac would mean you can onboard a merchant really easily with a simple web form instead of a big merchant application, but they may not really understand why. So can you talk a little bit more just about the PayFac model in general? Why do the card brands have these different rules? What is the additional risk that's assumed? Talk to us a little bit more about kind of the nitty gritty of like how this works, if you would.
Yeah,
certainly. So, under the payment facilitator model, the PayFac is going through a very extensive registration and vetting process with sponsor bank, with the acquirer, getting registered with the card brands, and they have to prove that they have the technology, the processes, the personnel, and the procedures in place to underwrite merchants, to have ongoing fraud monitoring, technology, processes, and procedures in place. And they're getting registered as what's considered the master merchant. And so that concept of the master merchant is really important, because when you think about the traditional ISO model, every merchant that's getting set up to process payments has their own merchant ID. They're the merchant of record, and they have their own merchant ID, which comes with a very extensive vetting process based on the rules and regulations that have been set up by the card brands. Whereas under this payment facilitator model, once the PayFac goes through that registration process to become the master merchant, there's a much easier set of guidelines in place for that sub-merchant onboarding process, which is what facilitates the instant digital onboarding experience that you were alluding to. Whereas, ISOs, I think we're all familiar with the kind of 5-6 page PDF documents and collecting, driver's license, voided checks, previous processing statements to be able to onboard merchants. Whereas, in the PayFac model, you have an online digital form. Typically, there's no supporting documentation, and it really can be an instant process where, like in our model, about 80% of merchants are approved instantly. And so they can start processing payments, in 30 seconds after submitting their application. It's not, hey, we'll get back to you in a week once we've keyed in your PDF application and someone's manually reviewed it, and you go through this whole manual, ISO boarding process.
So just to clarify for my own sake, if you would, there must be some sophisticated underlying technology that allows you to take these accounts on without doing all of that background analysis?
There definitely is. I mean, we spent the better part of the last 3 years building out the core technology behind Tilled, and really well over 2 years before we even processed our first transaction. So, certainly a pretty extensive technology platform behind what we do. We also integrate into a lot of third-party systems that have their own set of APIs for us to run, soft credit checks and bank account verifications and TIN checks and, check against OFAC and match list. And so we're plugging into a lot of these third-party databases via APIs so that in real time, we can still run the necessary KYC and KYB checks on merchants. But instead of, a merchant filling out a PDF, an individual typing into a database, and then it, going out to run the check, a merchant's filling out an online form that gets sent into our API. We're then pinging these third-party API services to determine whether we can approve these accounts in real time so that we can really offer that instant boarding experience.
So how does then the model compare to, say, like a Stripe? I mean, you're still basically a PayFac like a Stripe is, but you're just then offering that through third parties?
So the difference between, Tilled and Stripe from a business model perspective, I think everyone's familiar with the 2.9% and 30-cent pricing model that Stripe employs. The difference here at Tilled is that we really think about ourselves as a payments infrastructure solution. And so we're offering interchange plus buy rates, just like you'd get from a traditional processor. And then there's typically a rev share component. And so we're giving a pass through of our wholesale interchange plus buy rates to the ISV or the software platform, who's then going out and setting the rates for their merchants. And so, take a gym management platform. They're then taking that interchange plus rate and they're deciding what the price point is to their set of merchants, whether that's interchange plus or flat rate pricing. And typically we're going to rev share the difference between that price that the merchant's paying and then that wholesale cost of processing. And so we're really enabling these software vendors to take advantage of the pricing models that the legacy processors have been using, for decades, but combine that with, much more modern technology, a la someone like a Stripe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, super interesting. Super interesting. So, a lot of these, and I guess, and again, you've done such a great job explaining this. I appreciate the detail, but even kind of digging a little deeper as maybe an example, let's say we have a company that provides, you mentioned scheduling. So they provide scheduling maybe for consulting or something. Maybe it's an attorney or whatever. And so they have this software that they're providing to attorney offices, let's say, and they want to be able to enable those attorneys to be able to accept payments through their scheduling software. And so what they might do is they might go out to the attorneys and say, hey, you can turn on payment acceptance and we only charge you 3% flat rate. And meanwhile, they're setting this up through Tilled. And so you're providing it to the software developer at, cost plus, whatever. And so there's an amount of margin there that's created. So now, in addition to the software fees, every time that attorney has a client that processes a payment, the software company is now making a residual, in effect, just like an agent would make. Is that kind of an accurate description of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I think what's pretty interesting is that for certain software companies, depending on their vertical, they can end up making 2 to 5 times the amount of margin on payments than they are on their core software. I think, Toast and MindBody are great examples of this, but really almost any vertical software company, the amount of residual or margin that, they can stand to make from payments is pretty sizable. And I think a lot of these companies, especially that are coming off of Stripe or Braintree, don't really realize, how much money they're leaving on the table. I think when you think about, a company, maybe 700 attorneys processing like $100 million in transactions, the question is always, well, how much money, can we generate? And, oftentimes we're seeing that there's about 80 to 100 basis points of margin for a lot of these vertical software platforms. And so on that $100 million in transactions, you're talking $800,000 to $1 million of potential, gross margin on these transactions, which is, a lot of money for a lot of these platforms, especially ones that are thinking about, raising venture capital, or maybe they're in between rounds. If you can go double or triple your margins, that's pretty enticing to investors.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that there's challenges, people are going to see, okay, I've been using Stripe, let's say as an example, and I'm, totally integrated with them. Now it's time for me to transition. How big of a deal is that? Because obviously, from a programming perspective, they're going to have to rebuild a lot of integrations and mess with your API and all of that. I'm just kind of curious, like, is that a pretty big roadblock, or is it kind of like, well, we're going to make so much money, it's a no-brainer? Like, what have you seen there?
So I think historically, when you looked at a lot of the options that people had available, if they were going to go in and integrate into Card Connect or WorldPay or TSYS ProPay, you were likely looking at a 4 to 6 month process to go from Stripe onto whatever the new system was. And what we've done at Till, to the point that we were making earlier, we spent several years building out really what we would consider best in class payments, APIs and technology, to the point where that integration, that transition from Stripe over to Till, you can realistically get done in less than 2 weeks. And so I think what historically was a pretty big roadblock for ISVs, we've now really made a no-brainer. And so if you can make an extra, $1 million a year, and it's going to cost you 2 weeks of, development effort, it's pretty hard to argue that that's not, worth doing. And when you think about, ISOs or agents looking to go sell integrated payment solutions to ISVs, I can imagine if you're selling the APIs, from a lot of these legacy processors, like that's a pretty difficult sale. And that was what I was doing prior to founding Tilt. I was trying to resell, TSYS and First Data and WorldPay and these solutions that, like, you were trying to convince the ISV that it was worth it because there was this big carrot. There was this residual.
But they needed to get, 2 full-time developers and pay them for 3 months to make it happen.
That's a really hard sell. That's a really hard sell.
$60,000, so okay, one last question I have kind of off the wall here about Stripe. I'm just curious. So one of the other things I'm sure you run into with a lot of ISVs is that they do some type of subscription or repeat or recurring type of payment where this card information, the cardholder data, is actually like stored on Stripe. I would imagine do you have a good solution to that, or is that a pretty big issue of like, that's great, but we can't like lose all of this recurring revenue and try to get it back? Or what have you seen with that?
You can actually transition tokens from one provider to another. And so, we have our own in-house level 1 certified gateway. And so we're actually able to receive tokens from, really anyone, whether it's, Stripe, Braintree, WorldPay. We're going through a process right now with WorldPay transitioning tokens over from a platform that had about 6,000 tokens, on WorldPay. Wow. And you're right. It's a big hurdle. They don't want 6,000 cardholders to have to go through the process of re-entering the data. And so you need, a level 1 provider to be able to receive the, file transfer from the existing solution. Now, it's not overnight. It's not like, you just send one email and 5 minutes later you have the tokens. It's definitely a process to go through that can take, a couple of weeks, but it's not an insurmountable hurdle with most providers.
Wow,
that's just a quick. I'm sorry, James, but I just want to. The 2 weeks that it would take to get to migrate the credentials is on top of the 2 weeks to get up, or is it sort of like coincident?
The reality is that the 2 weeks is more like emails back and forth. The actual like technical work is all of about an hour or two on their side and an hour or two on our side. It's really, you got to email someone, and then you got to get on the phone, and then you got to sign a document, and then you got to wait 5 days, for support to get back to you. And the timeline is typically in parallel.
Gotcha.
And I would imagine that Stripe and other providers are not like super excited to help you in this endeavor.
They know they're losing the business. Like, it's not like they're just jumping out of their seats to say, gee, what can we do to help you guys? We would absolutely love for our customer to, transition over to you. But I think the reality is, good companies and good providers realize that if you make it miserable for your customers on the way out the door, like, the word gets out. And I think if you're holding your customers and their data hostage, it ultimately makes it harder for you in the sales process, because they're going to go tell their buddy, and they're going to be like, when we were going through this with WorldPay, like, they drug it out for 3 months and it was a nightmare for us, versus like, oh man, WorldPay was fantastic. And so, I think providers have to realize that, like, word gets out around, how you're handling your migrations and that customer data, because it's really your customer's data. I mean, that's my perspective.
I agree. Okay. So, well, this has been fantastic. So let's transition now. Let's talk about ISOs and agents. So our audience, I want to start with kind of more of a sales marketing type of question here. You obviously have a lot of experience breaking into the ISV, marketplace. And, I think one of the obvious questions is like, how do you find them? Where, you mentioned it's like, well, they need to be at this certain stage or whatever. And I know you can't share all your secrets here, but can you give us a little bit of an insight of, how would you tell ISOs and agents and say, hey, this sounds awesome. I would love to develop some relationships with ISVs and maybe even work with Tild on that. But like, how do they go find the ISVs that are in that position where it's a good time to have that conversation?
Certainly. I mean, a couple different ways you can do it. I think, if you're an agent that's going door to door and you're out on the street, you're walking into, liquor stores, dentists, restaurants, whatever, what systems are the merchants using that you're walking into and experiencing? And so, if you can walk in and say, hey, I've seen 3 dentists that are using, your dental software. I would love to be able to work with you on an integrated payment solution. Maybe you notice that they don't have a card present terminal. Maybe you have an in where you go in and you talk to them and the merchant says, hey, yeah, we key in all of our transactions because our, dental software system doesn't actually offer card present terminals. Okay, well, that's a great opening for you to be able to reach out to that dental software company and say, hey, talk to one of your merchants. They were frustrated because they didn't have this solution. I actually have a solution for you. And so that's kind of one potential opportunity is just, hey, you're going out, boots on the ground, and you see, an opportunity. I think for us, we've seen LinkedIn to be a pretty tremendous channel for us, where we're just advertising, the solutions and kind of offering up our, insights and expertise. And I think, agents and ISOs have the ability to do that by starting to advertise, integrated payment solutions, because the reality is ISVs are looking for these solutions. They're frustrated with the existing solutions that they have, whether it's Stripe, Braintree, or the legacy processors. Like, they're frustrated with the current solutions that they have. And LinkedIn is a tremendous channel, as I imagine, you would agree to drive,
sure.
Lead flow.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Okay. So then tell us about, how you would work with these agents. So let's say we have an agent or an ISO and they happen upon one of these opportunities. They reach out and they very quickly realize that, getting them to integrate directly with First Data may not be in their best interest, right? So they want to reach out. Again, I know you can't divulge all the details here, but talk a little bit about the economics and also what kind of service you would provide to help facilitate these type of transactions.
Yeah, certainly. And so, from a sales support perspective, I think, especially for a lot of agents and ISOs where maybe it's their first ISV sale, we're happy to work with you and get on every call with that ISV to help sell them and get them over the line. If you can bring us in, qualified leads, we're happy to be that resource to really help you get the sale closed. It's not like we're expecting that our partners are just bringing us completely closed deals. That happens. And, we appreciate that. But that's not how it has to work. As far as the economics and the way that the commissions work, we're offering a lifetime, residual share to the ISOs and the agents that are bringing us deals. And so it's not like, hey, here's $1,000, Amazon gift card. Thanks for bringing us a deal. Like, no, you're going to get a share of every payment that's processed, through these partners. And we've already got a couple dozen, ISOs and agents that are signed up as referral partners with Tild. And it's a pretty big channel for us already. And so, we know that we have the personnel and the tools in place to be able to support our partners going to market. We can help you develop, collateral and think through, your outreach strategies, but it's definitely designed around a partnership mentality where we all share in the upside of the deals, that you can bring to the table.
Sure. And I think obviously it goes without saying here that, your model is predicated on the ISV making a good amount of money. So obviously this is not a traditional merchant account. They're not getting a huge percentage of gross margin because lion's share of that, I imagine, is always going to go to the ISV. But, it sounds like, we're talking about bringing on ISV where there's going to be potentially, hundreds or even thousands of merchant accounts. And so the initial volume is going to be pretty big and it's probably going to be growing over time. And so getting kind of a smaller piece of this really, really big pie is better than getting no piece at all, I guess is the idea, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think that's a great way to think about it where, maybe you're only earning 5 or 10% of the residual, but if that's, 10% of 100 basis points on $100 million, that may be more money than you're going to make going out and closing, 300 merchant accounts, on your own. And so I think that's one of the things that I don't think a lot of agents and ISOs understand is that, yes, it's a much smaller, piece of the pie, but it's a substantially larger pie that you're breaking off a piece of. And so, it's realistic for you to get, $5,000-$10,000 a month just from a single, referral deal once they fully ramp up.
Right. Yeah. Love it. So I know a lot of our listeners are going to be interested to learn more. I think this is one of those ones that people will probably store away and then they'll come back to it when they get that first ISV deal and like, wait a minute, I remember this episode, this guy named Caleb. So tell us, where should they go to learn more about you and about the company when the opportunity presents itself?
Certainly. You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. We're certainly active there, both me personally as well as the company. You can find us on our website, www.tild.com. We're also on Twitter at GetTild. Anyone that's looking to board more ISV business and really expand their portfolio that way, we would certainly love to chat with you and help you find a way to break into the ISV market.
And for those that are listening and can't see your fantastic shirt you have on there, Tild is TILLED, right?
Awesome. Thanks, James.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, thanks. Appreciate it, Caleb.
Thanks so much, Caleb.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So, Patty, we're talking about our sponsor, Lavu, and their processor agnostic point of sale. For a long time, I thought you can't sell cash discounting to restaurants.
Right.
One of the big reasons was tips. You can't charge a non-cash adjustment, so this is not going to work. And I really think Lavu came up with kind of an ingenious solution to this problem, which is, of course, you can do pay at the table, but if not, we're going to save you 80% instead of 100%.
Exactly. And if you want to save the extra, 20%, just buy a tablet.
Right.
That's basically all you got to do.
Yes.
And then you can have pay at the table. Your waits, the wait staff's going to love it. The merchant's going to love it.
Right.
And of course, the ISO and agents are going to love it because residuals would be nice.
Right. And so I think they've done a really good job, kind of behind the scenes. They've also made really good reporting along these lines because one of the issues with doing this is obviously then your batches are going to be a little bit odd because you're pulling this money that actually wasn't collected. And so some of that gets a little bit off, but the way that they've set up the reporting, it makes it very clear to the merchant. Everything still settles nicely. It works with the bank account. And then the merchant can look at that report and see, okay, here's the extra revenue that was collected. Here's the fees. And so here's what I saved. And it just makes it really, really clear to them about kind of how much revenue they were able to generate to offset the fees that they're being charged.
Yeah, it's really cool. I would encourage everybody who's listening to go to lavu.com. That's LAVU.com. Or else you can text the word Lavu to 63975. That's LAVU. And send that to 63975.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So, Patty, today I want to talk about one of the biggest opportunities that I see going into next year, 2022. In a podcast we have coming up here in a few weeks, we're going to be talking about selling cash discounting to restaurants, which is my number one. You're going to be talking about selling B2B payments, which is number two on my list. Right in there with that B2B, number 2 or 3 on my list is selling cash discounting or even surcharging, which is actually a really good option in this case, to card not present merchants. Now, when I bring this up, the actual opportunity here is for agents and ISOs to figure out how to prospect card not present merchants.
Right.
They just have not figured it out. And it's interesting to me, it's ironic in a way, because this is such a wide open market, and without getting specific or naming names and consulting clients, I mean, I know of several massive companies that have grown exponentially over the last 4 years that are focused on this vertical with all inbound marketing type of approach and W-2 inside salespeople. And really their success, of course, attributed to them doing a fantastic job operationally and everything else. But also in a way, it's because the independent sales agents and ISOs have not gone onto that field to compete.
Right.
And those that have are approaching it with really more of a referral type of approach, which is fine. If it's working for you, great. But
part of this is also because these guys are so used to, hitting the pavement and going door to door. It's so much different than going door to door.
Well, and what's so interesting to me, it just really blows me away, is a lot of these ISOs that have pretty well organized 1099 or even W-2 sales teams, they have lead generation efforts,
Yeah.
telemarketers, things like this, mailers, et cetera, et cetera. They intentionally exclude business types that are card not present.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
which is like, why?
Why on earth would you do that?
It's like, given how much volume's going into the card not present market right now.
Well, and especially considering the level of competition, it's like, hey, we have telemarketers. We're going to have them call all of the retail, locations in a certain area and all the auto repair shops and pizza shops to sell them cash discounting or whatever. And we definitely don't want to call plumbers, home services, anything like that. And I'm like, why? Because nobody else is calling them. You don't want to call them. You'd rather reach out to the retail store that got called 17 times in the last week about payment processing. Like, what are we thinking? So I think that where this really stems to is that the concern is that the salespeople don't know how to sell card not present merchants. And I actually think that in this case, it's a bit of an unfounded concern.
Yeah, I would think so.
The only real difference here, and I think one of the big concerns is this idea of technology integration. And the concept is that, well, all card not present merchants need a very in-depth, shopping cart or gateway API integration to their software. And that's not the case at all. Earlier in the episode, we talked to Caleb Avery, who is going after those types of accounts, right? Those are ISVs. Those are software companies.
Right.
But I'm talking about a card not present merchant. Most of them right now that are not already with one of your big competitors that's offering good services, most of them are doing one of two things, maybe three. But number one on the list is most of them are using a Square reader.
Right.
And they're typing in the numbers over the phone when they get called. I honestly think that's like the number one. As I talk to card not present merchants, it's literally like, can you email me your card number and expiration date so I can type it into my Square on my phone? And I'm like, no.
Right? I know.
I will not do that.
I was at a friend who's a plumber the other day, and I was watching him, okay, and can you give me the number on the back too? And I'm like, he's just using this little Square thing, and he's just keying everything in.
And that's like the most popular thing.
Sure.
Then you have the next most popular one, which is a Verifone terminal that's really should have already been replaced 3 years ago.
Right.
It's sitting on their counter. And whenever they randomly get a card payment, they key it in there. They discourage it. They try not to get card payments because it's so inconvenient to accept them,
Right.
Or number three, they have a gateway that they use, a legacy gateway, authorized.net, whatever it is. And they're not tied to that gateway. They probably don't even, they may or may not even like it. It's not like they're using all the functionality of it. They're just putting in card holder information. So, going with a very simple gateway solution, you need to make sure your agents have a very simple gateway solution. And all they need to be able to understand how to do in that gateway is to process a payment. Like run a test transaction. Like they already know how to do in a terminal. Every one of your agents should have at some point in their payments career run a test transaction in a virtual terminal.
Right. Like if they haven't, then they've been on Mars for the last 5 years.
Right. And I really think a lot of them haven't. And once they do that, they are ready to sell card not present merchants because that's all those card not present merchants want to do. Now moving beyond that, of course, you can show them how to hopefully do email invoices, which their customers will love,
Right.
And that's a big plus. And that's about it. You really don't need to go any further than that. Now, the other, issue with card not present merchants for years has been a perception among agents and ISOs that I've spoken with that card not present merchants are more sensitive to price with, processing fees because their transaction sizes are often very large and they don't want to spend $40 or $50 every time they run a transaction. Number one, I would say, that is not true, actually. So I did a lot of card not present, even back before we had anything going on with surcharging or whatever. But the truth is most of these card not present merchants are spending a fortune waiting to get paid if they run larger transactions. Or if they're running smaller transactions, they're spending a fortune on payroll and time and inconvenience to type in transactions every month and run them manually, and they don't have subscriptions set up, So there is a very clear and obvious offset. And they're generally very open to these conversations, right? So Then you layer on top of that surcharging, which is actually really good for card not present, because one thing that you will find is, and I think this trend will change over time, but right now consumers are much more likely to get upset about cash discounting with large card not present transactions.
Yeah, I could see that.
I know people that are doing it successfully, but again, you're running a $2,000, $5,000. I just got my pool. We had to get a new pool pump and heater and all this stuff, and it was like, $8,000 or something. So, for me to run that transaction, it's like, well, there's going to be an extra, whatever, $180 or $250 fee to run it as a card. That's a lot, Right. And so surcharging is actually positioned really well here to be able to say, well, just use your debit card, call your bank, get them to raise your limit temporarily and run it with your debit card. That's fine. Or offer ACH, So
that's what I was going to say.
Right. Yeah. So they can offer multiple options here. And in this particular case, that can actually be a plus. So I'm not against cash discounting. I think if you're going to do it as a quote unquote cash discount, you should provide an ACH option as cash.
Right. That's what I would do. Yeah, for sure.
So you can do that. Or again, do compliant surcharging. Well, avoid all the compliance headaches.
Avoid all the headaches. Yeah.
And it's fine. So, and again, there's plenty of good technology out there now. I know like probably 4 different processing companies, and I know technology companies that are processor agnostic that offer really good surcharging where it recognizes what it is. It's super easy in a gateway because it's virtual terminal. You can just pop up and show the consumer what they're going to pay.
Right. It's
really, really easy. So all that to say, this is another one of these big opportunities. And what I think is my mission in life and through the CC Sales Pro company here, our mission at our company has been keeping merchant sales competitive.
Right.
So what I'm always on my alerts go off when I see opportunities that are going to go to all the big PayFacs and the ISVs and everybody else. And I consult for a lot of these companies, I want them to win, but I want to make sure that the individual agents and ISOs are not caught flat-footed and they're not blindsided by these trends. In case you haven't noticed, retail and restaurants not doing great right now.
Right.
The independent owners, Amazon and Walmart are doing fantastic, but small business owners are not doing that good right now. And so, if you're like looking to future-proof your portfolio, you need to understand how to go after card not present. And I think we have just dramatically overcomplicated this concept. So what I would really encourage everybody to think about as you go into 2022, these last few episodes, I really want to try to talk about some things that can help you going into next year.
Right.
As you go into next year, think about card not present. Now, don't think about a room full of computer programmers. Think about a group of plumbers.
Right.
Right. Think about lawn care professionals, electricians, home services, right?
I just had a new boiler for my furnace put in. Somebody like that, I asked them, how am I going to get we'll mail you a bill and you can send us a check. I'm like, are you crazy?
Right. And it's like, that's just insane, that they would do that. Rather than saying, give us your email address, we'll email you a link, you click it, you can pay with either ACH or card.
Right.
We have 3 different, things you can do. You can do credit card, you can do a debit card for free or ACH for free, or you could do credit or debit, which has a fee, or ACH for free, whatever. Right. Setting that up, like in case you have been living under a rock and you didn't realize it, it's not hard to set that up anymore. It's super easy to set that up for people. Let them know, look, there's no fees at all. So you're not going to pay anything, or maybe you're only going to pay fees on debit and ACH or whatever. So the investment for them is going to be very minimal. Sorry about that. Oh, look at that. My wife calling. But it's going to be very minimal, the fees, and they can implement this. This is not hard. And they can train their sales team to be able to implement it as well. And then the issue becomes prospecting, right? That's the crux of it. How are you going to prospect? And this is my challenge to the individual agents out there. Listen, like if you said, I am going to prospect 5 card not present merchants every day, right? I'm going to figure it out. Right. You would figure it out by the end of the day.
Of course.
It's not hard. Like go buy a list of all of it's like the list that you would normally
do a Google search for your for your own, I live in Frederick. Plumbers in Frederick County, Maryland.
Exactly.
That's all the prospecting.
For some of these agents and ISOs, think of all the lists that you've bought in the past, all the SIC codes that you've excluded,
Right? Now we include them.
And exclude the other ones. Like,
right.
And then hit download. Like, that's literally all you have to do. They're right there. It's not like it's like super difficult to do this. So anyway, start prospecting card not present. Think about that going into next year. And I promise you, you're not going to regret it at the end of the year. If you get even one a day, I'm going to reach out to one card not present merchant every day, 5 days a week.
5 minutes a day.
That's going to be 250 businesses. I guarantee you're going to sell 30 of them, and all of a sudden you've got 30 card not present merchants that have a generally pretty high volume, high average ticket sizes, and they're going to be sticky and they're going to stay with you for a really, really long time. So there you go. There's your challenge for the day.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
Well, James, there's a law firm that has won numerous suits total in the last few years, totaling about $100 million in settlements against payment processing firms. Is taking on priority payments.
Mm-hmm. I saw this.
Priorities based in Georgia. They claim they have about 200,000 merchants. Plaintiffs named in the suit include a Miami-based hair salon and 2 fencing companies based in Hawaii. At least they have agents in really cool places.
Yes, that's good. That's good.
So attorneys have filed a motion in November in a court in Georgia seeking class action status. The lawsuit slams Priority for its, quote, improper sales and contracting scheme and for the additional unfair, unlawful, and fraudulent billing, and asserts that, quote, such conduct breaches Priority's contracts or implied contracts with merchants. Now, as an example, the lawsuit claims that agents tell merchants that fees will be limited to a low flat rate percentage of volume processed and that no fees will accrue if the account isn't used. But, of course, that doesn't happen. And the lawyers say Priority knows at the time of enrollment that these additional fees will be charged, but deliberately misrepresents, obscures, and hides such critical information from merchants. And then once enrolled, merchants are buried with, quote, unanticipated, improper, and excessive fees.
Yeah, so I think, too, it'd be interesting here at the outset to give a little context to our audience about how this all works. So obviously we should state, number one, we are not saying that we agree or disagree that these things are occurring. We're letting you know this is happening.
You know that people are out there trying to do this.
Yes.
Trying to file motions against this in court.
Yes. And so the idea here is, obviously, with companies like Priority, which is representative of many other companies, they are using 1099 contractors. They are not monitoring what these contractors are saying to merchants.
Right.
Therefore, there will, of course, be some percentage of the time that they are saying things that are inaccurate or outright lies. And that happens, right? So this company has a history. Do you know the names of any of the other companies? I can't remember off the top of my head of other ones that they've sued and been successful.
Oh, yeah. It's they've sued Mercury Payments.
Yes.
Merchant Choice, Wells Fargo, and PNC.
Yes. So, and they've been successful with all but I think 2.
Actually, all 4 of those they've been successful.
Right, but I think there was 2 others where they were unsuccessful.
That they were unsuccessful with.
And so the idea here, the way that this works is they are going to get class action lawsuit status, which means they're suing on behalf of all 200,000 Priority Payments merchants.
Right.
So it's kind of like they go to Priority and say, what's the total damage that you caused to all 200,000 of these merchants, which of course is an unanswerable question. This is going to be a massive amount. And so then they will negotiate the settlement amount, and this law firm will take a hefty 20, 30, who knows what percentage cut.
Yep.
And they will take a big cut. And then the remaining amount, they'll reach out to all 200,000 merchants and say, hey, you won this class action lawsuit. You didn't even realize that you were engaged in.
And
if you would like your
$200.
piece, yes. If you would like your piece of this $70 million settlement, reach out and we will split it evenly amongst those merchants who reach out. So it's an interesting thing. I think it, well, anyway, I'll let you continue. I think you have more.
Yeah, just let me, because one thing that I thought was interesting in this particular lawsuit that I hadn't necessarily seen before is all about the merchant agreement.
Yes.
Okay. And that, it says here that, basically it purports to bind the merchant into a long-term contract with more than 40 pages of boilerplate fine print.
Right.
But neither Priority nor its sponsor, which is Wells, accept the agreements by signing them, which they maintain as an express condition, that has to precede any kind of contract formation. And I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, I
because
saw that
basically, right? I mean, he's got a point there.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I wonder. It's like, to me, I was like, well, how does he know that they don't sign it?
Because when he looks at the agreements, there's no signature.
Oh, I see. So they're saying they're reaching out to the processor saying, give us a copy of our original agreement, and it's unsigned.
And it's unsigned.
Okay.
The only person who signed it was the merchant. And he's claiming that this puts the merchants in a quote state of contractual limbo. But anyway, they're looking for class action. I just thought this was really interesting. So I get news feeds from all over, and legal news feeds I get if it has anything to do with payments.
Right.
And so this was one of the law firm websites that I took it from. And I love this quote because, there's a little bit of, let me just say it. These companies, quote, these companies come in promising merchants the moon with all these extras and then lock them into contracts that weren't what they signed up for. It's fertile ground for litigation.
Yeah.
Which he knows well.
Yes. After all of the money that's been made. I mean, they probably made $30 million already on what they've done.
Easily, because what they're talking, these 4 lawsuits that they won add up to about $110 million.
Yeah.
30% cut of that is, over $30 million.
Right. Plus, probably plus legal fees, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But, I think that what it kind of reminds me, and of course I'm not a lawyer and this is not a legal opinion, but it kind of reminds me of old-fashioned ambulance chasers.
Yeah.
Yes. And with all of the hoopla over fees and everything, I think it is fertile ground for lawyers, and
Yes.
I think that we're going to see. I think this really, to me, this just calls for so much. It's like a call out. It's time to be more transparent.
Yeah, well, and I think it also is interesting because it just kind of calls into question some of the issues that exist with 1099 agents. And
we've talked a lot about that.
Yeah, and this one will be very interesting because when you look at the other 4 that they've won, none of those 4, to my knowledge, were primarily using the 1099 and independent ISO type of model.
Right.
They were using, Mercury was mainly going after ISVs early on and POS providers, and some of the others had W-2 sales forces and things of that nature. So this is what's unique about this one is this is the first time they've gone after a company that would be largely representative of our audience.
Right.
And I think if they win this lawsuit, which is no sure thing, but if they were to win it, I do think it would cause a lot of other processing companies to really take note of that. Mm-hmm. And to say, well, wait a second here, if we're financially liable for the promises our 1099 agents make,
maybe they should be W-2s.
Right. And one of the other things I thought of as well, and not to alarm anybody that sells for priority, because who knows how this will shape up, but I mean, it's like, what does that mean in terms of the agent residual contracts? Is this going to affect, are they going to try to take some of this from ISOs and agents and partners that,
right, sure.
Let's say that they end up getting a settlement for $20 million. Well, that $20 million, most of, the lion's share of the profit was already paid out to partners who are contractually obligated to offset any negatives.
Right.
And so will that affect in that way? So I think it's a very interesting one to follow just because, again, it's the first time this has happened, to my knowledge, in a big way to a large company that's almost entirely 1099 and independent ISO driven, which is our audience. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I'll definitely be following it.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.